Stop eating on my dime. Maternity leave isn't a disease, go get a job. From now on, everyone provides for themselves. Throwing his dirty dishes on the table, her husband went to bed. But in the morning, he was stunned by his wife's response. Good day, dear listeners. I'm happy to welcome you to my channel. Here's a new and intriguing story for you. Enjoy listening. 18-month-old Minalda woke up, as usual, at 6 in the morning. Her thin little voice calling for her mother broke the morning silence of the apartment. Esperanza, who had fallen asleep only 3 hours earlier after soothing her teething daughter through the night, automatically got out of bed. On the other side of the bed, Osvaldo grumbled something in his sleep and pulled the blanket over his head. Yes, sweetheart, I'm coming, Esperanza murmured, rubbing her sleepy eyes and heading to the nursery. Minalda was standing in her crib, holding onto the railing with her chubby little hands, smiling brightly at the sight of her mother. Mama! Mama! She chirped happily, reaching out her arms. Esperanza smiled despite her exhaustion. These moments were the only thing that helped her endure the endless marathon of motherhood. Good morning, my darling, she said, lifting her daughter and feeling the familiar heaviness of a full diaper. Oh, full again. Let's get you changed and have breakfast. While Esperanza was changing Minalda on the changing table, she was mentally making her to-do list for the day. Wash the pile of baby clothes, make breakfast, lunch, and dinner, clean the apartment, go to the store, air out the rooms, wash the windows, take the baby for a walk. Esp, came Osvaldo's sleepy voice from the bedroom. Where's my blue shirt? I've got an important meeting today. Esperanza rolled her eyes. The blue shirt was ironed and hanging in the closet, exactly where it always was. In the closet, second shelf. She shouted back, fastening the buttons on the baby's onesie. I don't see it, came her husband's annoyed reply. Esperanza sighed, picked up Minalda, and went to the bedroom. Osvaldo was standing in front of the open closet in his underwear, frowning as he sifted through the hangers. Here it is, Esperanza said, pulling out the blue shirt that hung right in front of his nose. Osvaldo muttered something that vaguely resembled thanks, took the shirt, and went on dressing, while Esperanza carried Minalda to the kitchen, put her in her high chair, and began making both her daughter's porridge and her husband's breakfast at the same time. Is my coffee ready? Osvaldo entered the kitchen, fully dressed but still struggling with his tie. Just a moment. Esperanza turned on the coffee machine, stirring the porridge with one hand and trying to keep Minalda from wriggling out of her chair with the other. I'm running late. You could have had it ready by now, Osvaldo snapped, stopping by the hallway mirror to finish his tie. Esperanza said nothing, though her insides were boiling. Before Minalda was born, Osvaldo had never spoken to her like that. He used to be attentive, caring, grateful for every little thing. But after she went on maternity leave, something had changed, as if her work had become invisible, something taken for granted. Your breakfast, she said, placing scrambled eggs with bacon and toast on the table. They're a bit burnt today, Osvaldo frowned, but still sat down. And not salty enough. Suddenly Minalda started crying, demanding attention. Esperanza rushed over with a spoonful of porridge. Hush, sweetheart. Mama's here. She gently stroked the baby's head. Can't I even have breakfast in peace? Osvaldo said irritably. You're home all day. Can't you keep her busy for 5 minutes? Esperanza felt something snap inside her. Home all day? She was up at 6, went to bed past midnight, constantly doing something, running like a hamster on a wheel, and still getting scolded. She's a baby, Osvaldo, was all she could manage to say. Well, I'm the one making money, he muttered, finishing his coffee. Anyway, I've got to run. I'll be late. There's a work party tonight. Don't wait up. He kissed his daughter on the head, brushed his lips briefly against Esperanza's cheek, and left. When the door closed behind him, Esperanza felt both relief and bitterness. They used to say goodbye so differently, long hugs, kisses, promises to miss each other. Where had all that gone? The day rolled on as usual, cleaning and laundry after breakfast, then playtime with Minalda, cooking lunch, the baby's short nap, during which Esperanza managed to iron clothes and start dinner. Then a walk in the park, where Minalda dirted 3 outfits, a bath, more cooking, cleaning the kitchen, evening games, and finally, the struggle to get her restless daughter to sleep. When the doorbell rang, Esperanza was just trying to convince Minalda that it was bedtime. At the door stood her neighbor, Felicidad, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, always ready with advice. Esperanza, dear, I baked some pies and thought I'd share, she said, handing her a plate covered with a napkin. Oh my, why isn't little Minalda asleep yet? She just won't settle, Esperanza sighed, inviting her in. Thanks for the pies, they're perfect. I didn't have time to bake anything for tea today. And where's your husband? Felicidad asked, following her into the kitchen. Working late again. They have a corporate event, Esperanza replied, seating Minalda on her lap. Humph, Felicidad snorted meaningfully. You look exhausted, dear. When was the last time you had a proper night's sleep? I don't remember, Esperanza admitted honestly. Minalda's teething, she sleeps badly, and there's just so much to do. And does your husband help? The neighbor asked directly, watching her intently. Osvaldo works a lot, Esperanza said hesitantly. He gets really tired. And you don't? Felicidad shook her head. Esperanza, you know what's most frustrating? Men think women at home don't work, like we just sit watching TV all day, while meals cook and laundry does itself. Esperanza smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed tears. Lately Osvaldo has become different, she admitted quietly. Always dissatisfied. Says I spend too much money on Minalda, that my maternity leave has gone on too long. Too long? Felicidad gasped. The child's only a year and a half. That's a perfectly normal leave. What, does he expect you to dump the baby in daycare and run back to work? He doesn't say anything specific, just complains. Esperanza shook her head. I'm already saving wherever I can. I buy the cheapest diapers, even though they give Minalda a rash. I make all her food myself, even though it takes so much time. Does he even realize how much a nanny costs? Felicidad snorted. Or a cleaner. Or a cook. Esperanza looked at her neighbor thoughtfully. The idea had never occurred to her before. No, I guess not. Exactly, Felicidad nodded. Men don't understand the value of housework until you show it to them in numbers. My late Seraphin used to complain too, back when I stayed home with the kids. But then I calculated how much it would cost to hire people for everything I did, and after that, he paid me a housewife's salary every month and never criticized my spending again. Minalda was dozing off in Esperanza's arms. The woman gently rocked her, pondering her neighbor's words. Maybe I really should calculate everything, she said thoughtfully, just to understand it myself. Do it, dear, do it, Felicidad patted her hand. And show your husband. Sometimes a man needs to see it on paper to believe it. Anyway, I've stayed too long. Put your little one to bed and get some rest. And remember, you're doing the most important job there is, raising a human being. That's worth more than any money. After the neighbor left, Esperanza finally laid Minalda down and, instead of doing more chores or collapsing into bed, she pulled out a notebook and a pen. What if I really do calculate it? She thought, starting to list all her daily duties. The next morning began as usual, but the air was heavy with tension. Osvaldo had come home after midnight, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, clearly hungover. Everything irritated him, Minalda's voice, the bright kitchen light, the coffee not hot enough. Listen, he grumbled, rubbing his temples, how much longer are you going to waste money on these diapers? I saw the receipt yesterday, that's insane. Can't you find something cheaper? Esperanza, who had spent the whole night working on her calculations, silently placed a plate of omelet in front of him. And all those jars and boxes of baby food, Osvaldo went on, not noticing her silence. You're home all day. Can't you just make it yourself? I do, Esperanza replied quietly. Almost everything, actually. Almost? Exactly. Osvaldo stabbed the air with his fork. Do you know how much almost costs? My colleague Diego says his wife makes everything from scratch. She even uses reusable diapers, washes them herself. Osvaldo, Esperanza interrupted him, how much do you think a nanny costs? What? He looked up at her, puzzled. What does a nanny have to do with this? Just curious. She shrugged, changing Minalda's dirty bib. Do you know how much a nanny charges for a full day with a child? I don't know, and I don't want to know, Osvaldo snapped. We can't afford a nanny anyway. Why are we even talking about this? No reason. Esperanza smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed serious. Just thinking, that's all. Osvaldo gave her a wary look but decided not to press further. He hurriedly finished breakfast, got ready, and, tossing a perfunctory bye, left the apartment. Esperanza watched him go, holding her daughter tighter. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered. Mama knows what to do. Sitting at the playground, watching Minalda struggle to climb the slide, Esperanza couldn't stop thinking about how much her relationship with Osvaldo had changed. There was a time when he carried her in his arms, called her the most beautiful woman in the world, promised her the moon. Minalda burst into laughter as she slid down straight into the sandbox, and Esperanza smiled. For that laughter, she could endure a lot, but not her husband's contempt. She took out the notebook with her calculations from her bag and looked over the numbers again. The total was impressive. "It's time to face reality, Osvaldo," she murmured, closing the notebook and lifting Minalda into her arms. "Time to remember that family isn't just about money, it's about respect." That evening, she decided not to cook dinner. Instead, she focused on her calculations, refining the details and neatly writing the final total on a clean sheet of paper. Osvaldo always came home at the same time. At 7:30, the front door would open, his briefcase would bump against the coat rack, and his heavy steps would echo through the hallway. Esperanza used to greet him with a smile, and dinner would already be waiting on the stove. But in recent months, things had changed. Esperanza no longer rushed to the door, and Osvaldo no longer kissed her hello. That evening, when she heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, Esperanza was in the nursery reading a bedtime story to Minalda. Her daughter was almost asleep, lulled by her mother's voice, when Osvaldo's irritated voice came from the kitchen. "Esp, where are you?" Putting the baby to bed, she called back softly, not wanting to wake Minalda. Footsteps approached, the door creaked open, and Osvaldo's head appeared in the doorway. "What about dinner?" he asked, his annoyance obvious. "Please, keep your voice down," Esperanza said, putting a finger to her lips. Minalda just fell asleep. "I didn't have time to cook. It's been a long day." Osvaldo rolled his eyes but closed the door quietly. Esperanza could hear him clattering dishes in the kitchen, opening and slamming the fridge. Carefully slipping out of the nursery, she closed the door behind her and went to the kitchen. Osvaldo was standing in front of the open refrigerator, studying its contents. "So what am I supposed to eat?" he asked without turning around. "Half a pack of cheese and leftover soup?" "You can reheat the soup," Esperanza suggested, crossing her arms. "Or order pizza." "Order?" Osvaldo slammed the fridge door shut. "Oh, sure, we've got money to waste on takeout junk, right?" "Osvaldo, I've been with the baby all day," Esperanza said tiredly, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "She's been fussy, her teeth are coming in." "I've had a long day too," Osvaldo interrupted. "I'm the one earning money here, not sitting at home with a kid. How hard is it to make a proper dinner?" Esperanza felt a wave of hurt rise inside her. "You think staying home with a child is easy?" she asked quietly. "What's so hard about it?" Osvaldo shrugged, taking out the container of soup. "Minalda sleeps half the day, plays by herself, and you just sit here relaxing, watching shows, scrolling through social media." Esperanza couldn't believe her ears. Did he really think that? Did he really not see how much effort and time she put into their home, their child? "Osvaldo, do you even believe what you're saying?" "What's wrong with it?" he replied, putting the soup in the microwave. "I mean, I get that you have to feed her and play with her, sure. But it's not like working in a mine. Definitely not like an office job with deadlines and a psycho boss." Esperanza watched him heat the soup, dozens of retorts running through her head. But she knew that saying any of them would lead to an argument, and if they started fighting, Minalda would wake up. "I work from morning till night," she finally said. "I get up at 6, go to bed past midnight. I wash, cook, clean, play with Minalda, teach her." Yeah, sure," Osvaldo waved dismissively, taking the steaming bowl out of the microwave. "You're a hero. But why'd you buy the premium diapers again?" "I told you to save money." "The cheap ones give Minalda a rash," Esperanza replied calmly. "Do you want your daughter to suffer so we can save $5? "Don't exaggerate," Osvaldo said, sitting down with his soup. "We could just spend more wisely. Every month you buy her new toys, books, clothes." "Children grow, Osvaldo," Esperanza said, feeling her anger simmering. "She needs age-appropriate toys, new clothes as she grows out of them, books for her development." "Oh, right, because without all those fancy $500 developmental toys, we'd be stupid, huh?" Osvaldo sneered, slurping his soup loudly. "When I was a kid, I played with sticks, and look, I turned out fine. Got a degree and everything." Esperanza took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Fine, I'll save more," she said evenly. "Anything else?" "Yes." Osvaldo looked up at her. "I think it's time you went back to work. Minalda's big enough now, you can put her in daycare. My salary isn't endless, and you're spending money like—" He didn't finish. From the nursery came Minalda's cry. Without a word, Esperanza turned and left the kitchen. After soothing her daughter back to sleep, she sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the baby's steady breathing. Fragments of her conversation with Osvaldo echoed in her mind, his words full of scorn for her work. "You're wasting money, you sit at home doing nothing, what's so hard?" Each phrase felt like a needle piercing her heart. How could he not see the obvious? How could he not value everything she did for their family? When she returned to the kitchen, Osvaldo had already put his plate in the sink and was sitting in the living room, eyes glued to his phone. "I washed my own dish," he said with a hint of self-satisfaction, not looking up. "See? I'm helping around the house." Esperanza glanced at the sink, one dirty plate, splashes of soup everywhere, crumbs on the table. "Thanks," she said dryly. "Esp, I'm serious about you going back to work," Osvaldo continued, putting his phone down. "We need the money. The apartment, the car, the mortgage, the bills, it's all on me. I'm tired of carrying the load alone." Esperanza stared at him silently. She had always been the peacemaker in their family, smoothing things over, yielding ground. But something inside her was rebelling against that old pattern. "Carrying the load alone?" she repeated. "And what do you think I've been doing all this time? Relaxing?" "I'm not saying you do nothing," Osvaldo rubbed his forehead. "It's just, well, it's different. You know what I mean." "No, I don't. Explain to me why my work has no value." "I never said that." "Yes, you did," Esperanza's voice trembled. "You're demeaning everything I do, as if staying home with a child, keeping the house running, isn't real work but just a hobby." "Esp, don't start," Osvaldo grimaced. "I'm tired. Let's not fight." "And I'm not tired?" Esperanza raised her voice but caught herself, remembering the sleeping baby. "Do you even know how many miles I walk around the apartment each day? How many times I lift Minalda, how many loads of laundry I do, how much I cook?" Okay, you do a lot," Osvaldo sighed. "But it's still not the same as having a job." Esperanza shook her head. "Useless. He would never understand, not until he tried it himself." "All right," she said wearily, "let's end this conversation. And one more thing." Osvaldo reached for his briefcase and pulled out some papers. "These are the daycare receipts. I stopped by today and asked about the rates. They take kids from 18 months, perfect for Minalda. If you go back to work, we can." Esperanza silently took the papers and set them on the table. Something inside her finally snapped. He had decided everything without even asking her opinion. Without wondering whether she was ready to put Minalda in daycare, whether she wanted to go back to work, whether she had the strength to split herself between a child, the house, and an office. "Osvaldo, I'm not ready to put Minalda in daycare," she said firmly. "Why?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "The conditions are good, the groups are small." "Because she's only a year and a half," Esperanza looked him straight in the eyes. "She's still little. She needs her mother close. What if she gets sick? What if she cries all day? What if she can't adjust?" "All kids adjust," Osvaldo said confidently. "My colleague's niece has been in daycare since she was 1. She's fine, a perfectly normal kid." "I won't send Minalda to daycare until she's at least 2.5, Esperanza cut him off. "That's not up for discussion." Osvaldo raised his eyebrows in surprise. He rarely heard that tone from his wife. "Fine," he said slowly. "Then we'll keep saving. No extra spending on toys, brand-name diapers, organic food." "You know what, Osvaldo," Esperanza suddenly felt a rare clarity in her mind. "I'm tired of your instructions about what to do with a child you see for an hour a day, and even then with a scowl. I'm tired of your disdain. Tired of feeling like a housemaid who isn't earning her keep." "Esp, why are you getting so worked up?" Osvaldo looked bewildered. "I just want us to live within our means." "No, you want everything arranged for your convenience. You want me to cook delicious meals, keep the house spotless, raise the child properly, while spending nothing, and preferably also bringing in money. Have you ever once thought about my wants and needs? About how hard it is to be alone with Minalda 24/7? When was the last time I went to the hairdresser, to the movies, or simply took a walk alone in the park? I work all day." Osvaldo began to bristle. "I can't also take care of the baby." "Oh, but I can handle the baby, the house, the cooking, the laundry, everything." Esperanza's voice shook with held-back tears. "And without any gratitude, only reproaches?" Osvaldo stared at his wife, at a loss. He clearly hadn't expected such a reaction. "Esp, let's calm down," he said conciliatorily. "We're both tired. We've said too much." "No, Osvaldo," Esperanza shook her head. "This isn't about being tired. This is what's been building up for months, your disrespect, your disregard, your constant criticism." At that moment, crying sounded again from the nursery. Minalda had woken up. See? Osvaldo spread his hands. Your yelling woke the child. Esperanza left the kitchen without a word. She needed to comfort her daughter. As for Osvaldo, she'd deal with him later. The next morning, the tension in the apartment could be cut with a knife. Esperanza prepared breakfast in silence. Osvaldo got ready for work in silence. Minalda, sensing her parents' mood, was unusually quiet too, glancing now at her mother, now at her father. When the door closed behind Osvaldo, Esperanza sighed with relief. She spent the whole day thinking the situation over, turning possible solutions over in her mind. Divorce? Too radical. Keep enduring it? Impossible. She needed something in between, something that would force Osvaldo to see the reality of their family life. That evening, the previous day's scene repeated itself. Osvaldo came home from work and headed straight for the kitchen, expecting to find dinner ready. But there was nothing on the stove, and the same leftovers were waiting in the fridge. Esp, he called, frowning. I'm here. She stood in the kitchen doorway, holding Minalda. Will there be dinner? Osvaldo asked, trying to keep his voice calm. No, Esperanza answered curtly. I didn't have time to cook. Minalda was fussy all day. I washed her clothes and cleaned. Again? Osvaldo slapped his palm on the table, making Minalda flinch and whimper. Second day without a proper meal. Don't shout, you're scaring the child. Esperanza hugged her daughter close. I'm not shouting. Osvaldo raised his voice, then immediately pulled himself together when he saw Minalda bury her face in her mother's shoulder. Fine, I'll make something myself. He ostentatiously opened the fridge, took out eggs and butter, and began clattering pans. Esperanza and Minalda left the kitchen, leaving him to fuss with dinner. Half an hour later, when Minalda was already playing with blocks on the living room rug, Osvaldo came out of the kitchen with a plate of fried eggs. Here, he said proudly. I made it myself. Not so hard. I even washed the dishes. Esperanza nodded without looking up from Minalda, who was carefully building a tower. What's going on with you? Osvaldo asked, sitting beside her on the sofa. You weren't like this before. You always cooked, cleaned. Before, you valued what I did, Esperanza replied quietly. Now you take it for granted, as if I'm obliged to serve you. I never said that. But you thought it. Esperanza finally looked at him. Every reproach, every remark, you said it without saying it. Osvaldo opened his mouth to argue, but just then Minalda toppled her tower and clapped gleefully, drawing her parents' attention. The moment was lost. Mama, Papa, boom, the little one announced, pointing at the scattered blocks. Yes, sweetheart, the tower fell, Esperanza smiled, leaning toward her daughter. Osvaldo watched them from the sofa, chewing his eggs thoughtfully. For a moment, something like understanding flickered in his eyes, but it quickly gave way to his usual irritation. When Minalda goes to sleep, we need to have a serious talk, he said, standing up. This can't go on. Esperanza nodded, keeping her focus on the game with her daughter. After Minalda finally fell asleep, Esperanza returned to the living room, where Osvaldo was pacing nervously. So, he began as soon as she sat down, what's going on? Are you on strike? Trying to punish me? No, Esperanza answered calmly. I just want you to understand how much I do for our family and start appreciating it. Fine. Osvaldo sat down opposite her. I do appreciate it. You're a good mother and a good homemaker. But you have to understand me too, we need money. I understand, Esperanza nodded. But you could at least stop scolding me every time I buy something for Minalda. Stop calling it wasteful or pointless. All right, I admit I overreacted, Osvaldo rubbed his forehead. I'm just worried about our future. I want us to have our own house, a better car, be able to travel. I want that too, Esperanza said gently, but not at the expense of our daughter's health and comfort, and not at the cost of my complete burnout. They fell silent, looking at each other across the coffee table. More was said in that pause than in all their previous conversations. All right, Osvaldo said at last, let's make a deal. You go back to your duties, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Minalda, and I'll try to be more understanding. I won't criticize your purchases for the child. Esperanza slowly shook her head. No, Osvaldo, that won't do. I want you to truly understand the value of my work, not just stop criticizing it. And how am I supposed to understand that? Irritation crept back into his voice. You'll find out tomorrow, Esperanza said simply, rising from the sofa. Right now, I'm going to bed. I'm tired. The next morning, when Osvaldo woke up, an unusual silence hung over the apartment. There was no smell of coffee or breakfast, no sound of Esperanza's or Minalda's voices. Alarmed, he jumped out of bed and looked into the hallway. In the kitchen, Esperanza sat at the table with a calculator and a notebook, writing intently. Minalda played nearby on her mat, occasionally handing her mother a toy, which she accepted absently without looking up from her calculations. "Good morning," Osvaldo said uncertainly as he walked into the kitchen. "What about breakfast?" "Morning," Esperanza replied shortly, without looking up. "I didn't make breakfast. I'm busy with important calculations." Osvaldo frowned but decided not to start the day with a fight. He quietly took out some bread and cheese, poured himself juice, and sat down across from his wife. "What are you calculating so intently?" he asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. "The value of my work," Esperanza said, lifting her eyes to his. "And you know what? The number turns out to be very interesting." Osvaldo stared at his wife, confused. "What do you mean, the value of labor? What are you even talking about?" "I mean how much we'd have to pay if we hired people to do everything I do," Esperanza explained calmly. "A nanny, a cook, a cleaner, a laundress, a personal assistant, a driver." "That's ridiculous," Osvaldo snorted. "Why would we hire anyone? We have you." "Exactly." Esperanza smiled. "So I decided to calculate what my services would cost, so you'd understand their real value." Osvaldo looked at his wife with a mix of puzzlement and irritation. "And what's the point of this whole performance? Do you want money for taking care of your own child and home?" "No." Esperanza shook her head. "I want respect and understanding. I want you to stop treating my work as something insignificant and automatic." At that moment, sensing the tension between her parents, Minalda came over to Osvaldo and held out a plastic toy carrot. "Daddy, here," she said solemnly. Osvaldo, suddenly softened, took the toy. "Thank you, princess." He patted his daughter's head. "What a delicious carrot." Minalda laughed and ran off for another toy. "All right," Osvaldo turned back to Esperanza. "I get your point. Let's end this farce. I promise to be more attentive." "No," Esperanza said firmly. "You haven't understood anything, but you will. Soon." She went on writing in a notebook, and Osvaldo, giving her one more bewildered look, went to get dressed for work. When he came out of the bathroom, shaved and ready, Esperanza handed him a sheet of paper. "What's this?" he asked, reluctantly taking it. "It's a bill," Esperanza said simply, "for all the services I provide our family. Look closely." Osvaldo ran his eyes over the neat lines. "Nanny, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, $1,400 per month. Cook, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, $900 per month. Cleaner, daily cleaning, $700 per month. Laundress, washing, ironing, minor mending, $350 per month. Personal assistant, shopping, medical appointments, organization, $450 per month. Driver, errands with the child, $350 per month. Total per month, $4,150. Total for 2 years, $99,600. At the bottom was a note, debt for services rendered. 5-year installment plan. Osvaldo let out a low whistle of surprise. "Is this some kind of joke?" He held the sheet back out to Esperanza. "No." She didn't take it. "This is the real cost of what you call sitting at home. I checked market rates. It's accurate." "Esp, are you out of your mind?" Osvaldo tossed the paper onto the table. "I don't owe you anything. We're a family, not contractors." "Exactly," Esperanza nodded, picked up Minalda, and went into the other room. Preparing for the conversation, Esperanza hadn't slept all night. After Osvaldo came home from work to find an empty fridge, after yet another fight and accusations, after his irritated "I could handle all this housework myself," she made her final decision. While Minalda slept and Osvaldo, after some grumbling, settled in front of the TV with a sandwich, Esperanza pulled out her notebook and began to write. Line by line, she methodically listed everything she did in a day: getting up at 6, making breakfast, dressing Minalda, playing with her, developmental activities, a walk, grocery shopping, making lunch, laundry, ironing, cleaning, bathing the child, putting her to bed. Then she opened her laptop and began looking up the cost of various services. How much does a nanny charge for a full day? How much is a housekeeper? A cook? A driver? An accountant to manage the household budget? She wrote down average market prices and multiplied by days and hours. The total was truly impressive. Even Esperanza was surprised when she drew the final line. "Does my work really cost that much?" she thought, staring at the 6-figure number. But she immediately checked herself, and why not? I work with no days off, no vacations, no sick leave. She remembered how 6 months earlier she'd had the flu but still kept caring for Minalda, cooking, cleaning, because who else if not me? Osvaldo, meanwhile, holed up in the living room with his laptop, insisting he couldn't afford to get sick. He had important projects. By dawn, the plan was ready. Esperanza finally lay down for a couple of hours before Minalda woke again. Inside, she felt a surprising calm. For the first time, she felt strong and confident that she was right. Osvaldo left for work still in shock from the bill his wife had presented. Esperanza heard him mutter under his breath about female hysterics and nonsense, but she paid no attention. The important thing was that the seed had been planted. Now it was time to prepare part 2 of the plan. "Let's go, sweetheart," she said to Minalda, settling her into the stroller. "We're going on a little trip today." The first stop was a mobile phone store, where Esperanza bought herself a new SIM card. Then she and Minalda went to the bank, where Esperanza opened an account in her own name. Until then, she and Osvaldo had only a joint account, which he effectively controlled. "Estefania!" Minalda cried happily when they walked into the neighborhood supermarket. Estefania, the cashier, waved to them. She often saw Esperanza with her daughter and always had kind words, and sometimes a small treat, for the little girl. "How are my favorite ladies today?" she asked, leaning toward the stroller. "We're great, Estefania," Esperanza smiled. "Listen, I have a question. You do grocery delivery, right?" "Of course." Estefania handed Esperanza a flyer. "Here, it's all written down. Delivery is free for orders over $150. Very convenient with a child." "Thank you," Esperanza said, gratefully taking the brochure. "One more thing, do you deliver prepared foods? From your deli, you know?" "Not yet," Estefania shook her head. "But I can recommend a good meal delivery service. My friend works there. They give discounts to regular clients." Esperanza took out her phone and wrote down the contact information. The plan was taking clearer shape. After the store, they stopped by Felicidad's. Seeing them, the neighbor threw up her hands. "Esperanza, what's happened? You look so determined." "Felicidad," Esperanza sat Minalda down to play with the neighbor's cat and took a seat at the table. "Could you help me?" "Of course, dear, anything. Tomorrow I might need you to watch Minalda for a couple of hours. I'm going to have an important conversation with Osvaldo, and I don't want our daughter to hear." "Don't even hesitate," Felicidad squeezed her hand. "I've been telling you to put him in his place. Your husband's gotten far too bold." "I'm not planning a scene," Esperanza shook her head. "I just want him to understand the value of my work. And for that he'll have to live under slightly different conditions." Felicidad nodded knowingly. "Right, girl. Sometimes a man needs to see that without a woman he's all thumbs. Especially someone like your Osvaldo, spoiled." Esperanza didn't correct her, though Osvaldo wasn't spoiled. His mother had died when he was 15, and he'd become independent early on. But in one respect Felicidad was right. Osvaldo had grown used to always finding warmth and care at home, and he took it for granted. Back at home, Esperanza continued her preparations. She studied information on grocery and meal delivery in detail, downloaded the app, and made a list of necessities. Then she washed, dried, and ironed all her and Minalda's clothes, but deliberately left a mountain of Osvaldo's laundry untouched. She decided not to cook dinner either. Instead, she ordered food delivery, specifically Osvaldo's favorite dish, but only for herself and Minalda. The order was scheduled to arrive an hour after his return from work. "It's time he learned what it's like to be invisible and unappreciated," Esperanza thought as she put Minalda down for her afternoon nap. She felt no malice or desire for revenge, only the hope that Osvaldo would finally understand her point of view. The sound of a key in the lock came precisely at 7:30 p.m. Esperanza was sitting in the living room, playing blocks with Minalda. At this hour there was usually dinner ready on the stove and the table was set, but today the kitchen was empty and quiet. "I'm home," Osvaldo shouted from the hallway. "We're in the living room," Esperanza called back, not getting up. Osvaldo walked in, loosening his tie as he went. His eyes immediately fell on the coffee table, where the invoice he'd left that morning still lay. "You're still on about this nonsense?" he asked tiredly, dropping into an armchair. "It's not nonsense," Esperanza replied calmly, helping Minalda build a tower of blocks. "It's the real value of my work." Let's not start," Osvaldo rubbed his temples. "It's been a hard day. I'm hungry and exhausted." "I'm tired too," Esperanza looked at her husband, "and hungry as well. But unlike you, I don't expect someone else to solve those problems for me. What? Osvaldo frowned. What are you talking about? About the fact that you come home expecting dinner to be ready, the apartment spotless, shirts ironed, Esperanza said quietly, so as not to scare their daughter, but firmly. You take my work for granted. Esp, we've already gone over this, Osvaldo sighed. I get it, you want more recognition. Fine, I'll thank you more for. No, Esperanza cut him off. I don't want perfunctory thanks. I want you to truly understand how much I do for this family. And the only way to understand it is to try it yourself. Osvaldo raised his eyebrows in surprise. You mean you want me to start cooking and cleaning? Not exactly. Esperanza shook her head. I want us to switch roles for a week. You'll keep going to work, but all the housework and caring for Minalda will be on you. And me? I'll rest. Like you do after work. Osvaldo laughed. You're joking, right? How am I supposed to work and watch a child at the same time? And how do you think I manage the house and watch a child at the same time? Esperanza shot back. But you're right, it's impossible. That's why you'll have to hire a nanny for the hours you're at the office. A nanny? Osvaldo shook his head. Are you out of your mind? Do you know how much that costs? Of course I do. Esperanza pointed to the invoice on the table. It's all written there. But you'll only need her while you're at work, so it'll be cheaper. Esp, this is insane. Osvaldo got up from the chair and began pacing the room. So we're going to spend money on a nanny so that you can what? Just relax? What about your speeches on how we need to save? That's exactly the point, Esperanza smiled. We save a fortune because I do all this for free. But you don't value it. So you need to learn firsthand what staying home with a child actually costs. At that moment the doorbell rang. Esperanza stood up, took Minalda in her arms, and went to answer it. Delivery for Esperanza Cruz, a young courier said, handing over a bag of food. Thanks, Esperanza took the bag with her free hand. That's right. Osvaldo came into the entryway, watching in surprise. You ordered food? He asked when the courier left. Yes, for me and Minalda. Esperanza went to the kitchen and started taking containers out of the bag. Your favorite steak with vegetables, but only for two. Sorry. Are you kidding me? Osvaldo stared at his wife, eyes wide. You're ordering food when you could have just cooked for everyone? And why should I cook? Esperanza asked, settling Minalda into her high chair. Yesterday you said it wasn't hard at all, so cook for yourself. Osvaldo opened his mouth to argue, then turned around silently and left the kitchen. Esperanza heard the bedroom door slam. She calmly fed Minalda, ate her own dinner, then cleared the table and took her daughter to the bath. The bedroom stayed quiet the whole time. Only when Esperanza, after bathing Minalda and putting her in pajamas, came into the nursery to read a bedtime story, did Osvaldo appear in the doorway. He looked thoughtful, and not as angry as before. Can I read to Minalda? He asked unexpectedly. Esperanza raised an eyebrow in surprise but nodded. Of course. She handed him a children's book and stepped aside to give him the spot by the bed. Osvaldo sat on the edge and began to read. Minalda smiled happily, poking at the bright pictures with her finger and repeating some of the words after her father. Esperanza watched them from the doorway, feeling a strange mix of tenderness and resolve. She loved her husband, loved their little family, but she could no longer live in a system where her work was devalued and she herself slowly dissolved into an endless stream of chores. When Minalda finally fell asleep, Osvaldo carefully left the nursery and closed the door. Esperanza was waiting for him in the living room. All right, he said, sitting opposite her, let's talk. For real, no invoices or ultimatums. I'm all ears. Esperanza folded her arms. I understand you're exhausted, Osvaldo began in a conciliatory tone. That you need more help with Minalda and the house. I'll help more on weekends. We can hire a cleaning service once a week so you can rest a bit. But this nanny and switching roles idea, it's too much, Esp. Why? Esperanza asked. Because you're afraid to be in my shoes? I'm not afraid, Osvaldo grimaced. It's just a pointless expense. We can't afford a nanny. You're wrong, Esperanza shook her head. What we can't afford is to lose our family. And that's exactly what will happen if nothing changes. Osvaldo flinched. What do you mean? That I'm at the breaking point, Esperanza said simply. I don't feel like a wife or a mother, just unpaid help who's constantly criticized for spending. I don't want a divorce, Osvaldo. I want our family to be happy. But for that, something has to change. Osvaldo was silent for a long time, staring at a single spot. Finally, he took a deep breath. All right, he said quietly. Let's try your experiment. 1 week. Not a day more. Thank you, Esperanza smiled, feeling relief spread through her. It's the right decision. You'll see. The next morning began with unusual hustle. Osvaldo, who normally just got up, took a shower, and headed to the kitchen where breakfast was waiting, now wandered about the apartment, at a loss. Esp, where are the clean shirts? He asked, opening the closet. I don't know, said Esperanza, comfortably seated in an armchair with a cup of coffee, flipping through a magazine. Didn't you iron them? When would I have had time? Osvaldo rolled his eyes. I went to bed late last night. And I go to bed late every night, Esperanza shrugged. And yet in the morning there's always a clean, ironed shirt waiting for you. Magic, I guess. Osvaldo muttered something and kept rummaging through the closet. He finally found a halfway decent shirt he could wear without ironing. Minalda, who by that time was usually washed, dressed, and fed, was still asleep in her crib. Osvaldo checked the time and cursed. Damn, I'm going to be late. What about Minalda? She's still asleep. Then wake her, wash her, dress her, feed her. Esperanza turned a page. That's what I usually do. I won't have time to do all that before work, Osvaldo exclaimed. Then you'll have to call and say you'll be late, Esperanza replied calmly. Or find a morning nanny. There are plenty of ads online. Osvaldo looked completely lost. But this is not logical. I can't be late to work every day because I have to dress and feed a child. And I can go without sleep at night, get up at 6, spin like a hamster all day, and still be expected to keep perfect order, serve a delicious dinner, and be in a cheerful mood. Esperanza finally looked up from her magazine. Is that your logic? Osvaldo froze, looking at his wife. For the first time in a long while, he saw her rested, calm, without the perpetual fatigue in her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. All right, he said slowly. I get it. I'll take the day off today. I'll take care of Minalda and look for a nanny. But keep in mind, those costs will hit our family budget. We'll have to cut something. Of course, Esperanza nodded. As it says on my invoice, nanny services cost money. I used to do that job, for free. At a loss for words, Osvaldo left the room. A minute later, Esperanza heard him on the phone, informing his colleagues he'd be out. When the little voice of a just-woken Minalda came from the nursery, Esperanza instinctively twitched to stand up, but then remembered their agreement and stayed seated. Osvaldo, she called, Minalda's awake. Coming, he answered, and a second later he hurried past her toward the nursery. Esperanza smiled and took a sip of coffee. The day promised to be interesting. By lunchtime Osvaldo looked exhausted. Minalda, who usually played calmly with her mother, was fussy with her father, refused to eat her porridge, and threw a tantrum while being dressed. How do you handle this every day? He asked when Minalda finally fell asleep after lunch. Esperanza, who had been watching her husband from the sidelines all day and only stepped in when he truly didn't know what to do, shrugged. You get used to it, and you learn how to approach things. Minalda isn't always this cranky, she's just not used to Dad dressing and feeding her. Still, Osvaldo flopped onto the sofa next to Esperanza. I don't understand why you couldn't just say you needed help. Why the whole show with the invoice and swapping roles? Because I did say it, Esperanza replied quietly. Many times. But you didn't hear me. You thought I was exaggerating, that staying home with a child isn't real work. Remember? Osvaldo looked away, embarrassed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Esperanza shook her head. And you know what hurts most? That you treated my work as something insignificant, secondary to your real job. In reality, I work more hours than you do, without weekends, vacations, or lunch breaks. Osvaldo stared at his hands in silence. I don't want a divorce, Esperanza went on. I love you, Osvaldo. But I want you to respect what I do, to understand that domestic labor is work too, just unpaid. I understand, Osvaldo said softly. Honestly, I'm starting to understand. All day he diligently searched for a nanny, calling agencies and private ads. By evening he had found 2 candidates who agreed to come for interviews the next day. When dinner time came, Osvaldo stood staring helplessly at the fridge. What are you going to cook? Esperanza asked from the doorway, watching him. I have no idea, Osvaldo admitted. Maybe we should order pizza? Or sushi? Spend money again? Esperanza raised an eyebrow. What about your speeches on saving? Osvaldo sighed. Fine, I'll cook something. What do we have in the fridge? No idea, Esperanza echoed his words. I usually keep track of the groceries and make the shopping list, but today that's your responsibility. Osvaldo opened the fridge and looked gloomily at the half-empty shelves. There's almost nothing here. Then you'll need to go to the store, Esperanza said with a shrug. Just don't forget to make a list, or you'll forget half of what we need. Minalda, who had been playing in the living room, suddenly appeared in the kitchen holding a doll. Daddy, look. She held the toy out to Osvaldo. Very pretty doll, sweetheart, he replied distractedly, still studying the fridge. Daddy, play. Minalda insisted, tugging at his pants. Minalda, Daddy's busy. Osvaldo gently moved her aside. I need to make dinner. Daddy, play. She repeated, her eyes filling with tears. Minalda, please. Desperation crept into his voice. Daddy really is busy. Esperanza watched the scene with understanding. How many times had she been in that exact situation, needing to cook, do laundry, clean, while Minalda demanded attention and play? Daddy, play. Minalda was openly sobbing now, dropping the doll on the floor. Help me, Osvaldo pleaded helplessly. It's your day with the child, she reminded him. But I can give you a tip. You can invite her to help you cook. Kids love to feel useful. Osvaldo looked at the crying Minalda, then at the half-empty fridge, then at the clock, and suddenly crouched down in front of his daughter. Minalda, do you want to help Daddy make dinner? He asked, wiping the tears from her cheeks. The crying stopped instantly. Minalda clapped happily, took Osvaldo by the hand, and dragged him to the kitchen. The week flew by unnoticed. Esperanza had never imagined that simply observing from the sidelines could be so therapeutic. Every day she saw Osvaldo slowly but surely begin to understand what it means to be the one who runs the home and raises a child. After the third day of the experiment, Osvaldo found a nanny, a pleasant middle-aged woman named Carmen, who agreed to come while he was at work. That solved part of the problem, but evenings and weekends still rested entirely on his shoulders. Do you know how much she charges per hour? Osvaldo asked when Carmen left after the interview. $17. And that's the minimum, because she agreed to regular part-time work. Really? Esperanza replied evenly, not looking up from the book she was reading in the armchair. In my invoice it was even less. I lowballed the rates. Osvaldo was about to argue, but only sighed and went to the nursery, where Minalda was insistently calling him to see the tower of blocks she had built. By the fourth day of the experiment, when Osvaldo's initial irritation had turned into weary resignation, Esperanza began to notice interesting changes. He stopped being so picky about spending on diapers and baby food. On the contrary, one day he came home from work and pulled a new set of educational toys for Minalda out of a bag. The sales assistant said these are the best for her age, he explained, noticing Esperanza's surprised look. It was clear the new role wasn't easy for him. A couple of times Esperanza caught him secretly watching tutorials on how to cook a simple dinner or handle a child's tantrums. It was touching and also earned her respect. Osvaldo was genuinely trying. On the fifth day, a turning point came. Esperanza returned from a walk. She really was enjoying her free time, strolling in the park, meeting friends she hadn't seen in months, and found Osvaldo in the kitchen amid utter chaos. Flour was scattered all over the counter, eggshells on the floor, and Osvaldo, looking completely desperate, was trying to rescue something smoking in a pot. What are you doing? Esperanza asked cautiously. I was trying to make pancakes, Osvaldo said glumly. Minalda asked for them. I found a recipe online, but something went wrong. He looked so lost that Esperanza couldn't help stepping in, gently moving him away from the stove. Let me help, she offered, checking the pot. It's actually not that bad, the pan is just too hot. Together they saved the batter, and soon an impressive stack of golden pancakes appeared on the plate. Minalda, watching from her high chair, clapped happily. Thank you, Osvaldo said quietly as they washed the dishes together after dinner. I wouldn't have managed without you. Sometimes we all need help, Esperanza answered simply. There's nothing shameful about that. Osvaldo was silent for a long time, methodically drying the plates with a towel. I never realized, he said at last. I didn't understand how hard all this is. Cooking, cleaning, Minalda with her constant needs. And you handled it all alone, every day. Esperanza nodded silently, continuing to wash the dishes. I'm sorry, Osvaldo said suddenly, with such sincerity that Esperanza froze. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate everything you do. For treating it as unimportant. She turned to her husband. There was genuine remorse in his eyes. I accept your apology, she said softly. But it's not just about acknowledgement. It's about truly understanding the value of domestic labor. I do understand, Osvaldo nodded. I really do. And you know what? I think we need to seriously revise our family budget. On the seventh day of the experiment, Osvaldo looked oddly excited. He spent the whole day making calls, jotting things down, whispering with the nanny when he thought Esperanza wasn't listening. Minalda, sensing her father's unusual mood, was also livelier than usual. That evening, after putting their daughter to bed, Osvaldo invited Esperanza into the kitchen, where a folder lay on the table beside 2 cups of fragrant tea. I want to talk about our agreement, Osvaldo said when they sat down. Agreement? Esperanza raised an eyebrow. You mean our experiment? Tomorrow's the last day, just as we agreed. Yes, but I want to propose new terms. Osvaldo opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper, one that looked very much like the invoice Esperanza had once presented to him. I made my own calculations. Esperanza took the sheet with interest. On it, in Osvaldo's neat handwriting, were listed the same items she had once written herself: nanny, cook, cleaner, laundress, but with one significant difference. Next to each item there was not only a monetary amount, but also a percentage of the family budget that should be allocated to each service. What's this? Esperanza asked, not quite understanding her husband's idea. It's, well, a recognition that your work is a real contribution to our family, Osvaldo said, looking a little embarrassed but resolute. I calculated how much we save thanks to everything you do, and realized it's much more than what I earn. Esperanza stared at him in surprise. And what are you suggesting? First, Osvaldo began, counting on his fingers, to officially recognize that your domestic labor is work. Second, to give you a personal budget, money you can use however you wish. That will be your salary. Third, I'll take on part of the household chores, especially on weekends, so you'll have time for yourself. Esperanza listened silently, barely believing her ears. Was this the same Osvaldo who, just a week ago, had complained about the cost of diapers, now offering her a personal budget? And one more thing, Osvaldo continued, I spoke with Carmen. She's agreed to come once a week so you can have a day to yourself, to go to the hairdresser, meet friends, or just rest. Osvaldo, Esperanza said slowly, you realize this means significant changes to our budget? I do, he nodded. And I'm ready for that, because I've understood something important. By saving on your rest and well-being, we risk losing something far more valuable, our family. Esperanza felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected this turn of events, hadn't expected Osvaldo to truly understand and change. That's a very generous proposal, she said finally, but I don't want you to do this out of guilt or because I taught you a lesson. No, Osvaldo shook his head. I'm doing it because I've genuinely realized how valuable your contribution is. And because I want you to be happy. For all of us to be happy. He reached across the table and took her hand. So, can we sign a peace treaty? He asked with a soft smile. We can, Esperanza nodded, squeezing his hand in return. The week-long experiment was officially over, but the changes in their family were only just beginning. Esperanza gradually returned to her usual responsibilities, but everything felt different now. Osvaldo truly kept his promises. He helped on weekends, no longer criticized expenses for Minalda, and gave Esperanza her own personal budget. The first time Carmen came to look after Minalda while Esperanza went to the beauty salon felt strange. Esperanza almost felt guilty leaving her daughter. But when she came home relaxed, with a new haircut and manicure, she realized how much she'd missed this. It suits you so much, Osvaldo said sincerely when he saw her transformation. You look beautiful. Minalda, studying her renewed mother closely, suddenly declared. Mama's pretty, like a princess. And that simple, childlike admiration was worth all the awkward moments and difficult conversations. 3 months passed. One evening, after Minalda had gone to bed, Osvaldo and Esperanza were sitting in the living room, enjoying a rare moment of quiet, when Osvaldo suddenly asked, Do you remember that invoice you gave me? For all your services? Of course, Esperanza smiled. The one that made you walk in my shoes for a week. You know, Osvaldo said thoughtfully, looking at the soft glow of the string lights they'd recently hung for coziness, back then I was sure you were exaggerating, that it couldn't possibly cost that much. But now I realize you actually underestimated it. Really? Esperanza looked at him with curiosity. Yes, Osvaldo nodded. Because your invoice didn't include the most important thing, the love and care you put into everything you do. And that's priceless. Esperanza felt tears welling up in her eyes, not from resentment or exhaustion, as before, but from happiness and gratitude. Come here, she said, patting the spot next to her on the couch. Osvaldo moved closer, and Esperanza rested her head on his shoulder. You know what's most amazing? She asked softly. Sometimes you have to go through a crisis to truly learn to appreciate each other and to understand the value of what we do. Yes, Osvaldo agreed, wrapping an arm around her. But the important thing is, we did learn. And now our family is stronger than ever. 2 years later, Minalda was already attending preschool, and Esperanza had started working part-time from home. She had always loved design and had finally found a way to pursue it. Osvaldo had been promoted at work, but that didn't change their new family principles. Domestic work was still valued and shared fairly. When they were finally able to take their long-awaited vacation by the sea, their first real family trip since Minalda's birth, Osvaldo unexpectedly raised a toast at dinner in the restaurant. To my wife, he said, who taught me the most important lesson in life, that true love isn't just about romance, but about respecting each other's work, caring, and supporting one another. Esperanza smiled, raising her glass. And to peace treaties that make us happier, she added. And Minalda, growing up in this atmosphere of mutual respect, lifted her little cup of juice and said brightly, to Mama and Papa, the best ever. Not every family problem can be solved as easily as with an invoice for services. But for Osvaldo and Esperanza, it became a turning point, transforming a marriage on the brink of collapse into a true partnership of equals. And Minalda, watching her parents, learned the most important lesson of all. In a family, everyone's contribution matters, even if it can't be measured in money. And that lesson was worth more than any bill.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.